Hello and welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick and this is our early review of the Saucony Kinvara Pro. So the Kinvara Pro is an all-new shoe from Saucony. It's billed as a max-stacked daily trainer, a plated daily trainer, or a plated shoe for the masses in the mould of maybe something like the Hoka Bondi X. Now, it's got Kinvara in the name. Kinvara, to my mind, means a lightweight, minimalist, low-drop shoe generally. This is none of those things. It's not really very much like the Kinvara at all. I've been thinking about it more as the Endorphin Max because it's got a lot more similarities to the Endorphin range, and it's a pretty interesting new release from Saucony. An expensive new release as well. It's £200 in the UK, $180 in the US, so the UK getting hit pretty hard on the conversion there. It weighs in at 303 grams or 10.7 ounces in my UK size 9, so pretty hefty shoe. That heft is down to the big stack you've got here. It's 42mm at the heel and 34mm at the forefoot for an 8mm drop. The big stack is made up of two different foams. You've got a layer of Saucony's Power Run PB foam on top. That's the PBA foam we see on things like the Endorphin Pro 3 and Speed 3 shoes. Then you've got the brand's Power Run foam on the bottom, which is a hardier, firmer foam than the Power Run PB. Running in between them is a 3/4 length carbon plate. You can see it from below there, and you've got the speed roll geometry that you have with the Endorphin line as well, so big rocker on the shoe. There's also a Power Run Plus sock liner to add a little bit more comfort there as well, and it's a pretty wide shoe for stability purposes, given that you've got such a high stack going on. The upper has a lot of little plastic line overlays on it and suede overlays on the collar, fair bit of padding around the heel as well, and a partially gusseted tongue. It's attached at the top but not further down the shoe. You've got a very noticeable internal heel counter, big piece of plastic there to try and add some stability to what is a high stack shoe. And the outsole is basically the midsole. It's the Power Run foam you have on the bottom of the shoe that's been molded to create a tread on the bottom there. There's no actual rubber outsole on the shoe, but this is pretty hardy stuff, this Power Run foam, and it should hopefully offer good durability despite the lack of rubber. We've got 5 run testers in the video today who've had a chance to test out the Kinvara Pro, but none of us have done loads of running in it, so generally we've all done 2 or 3 runs. So this is an early review, which is somewhere in between our first run reviews and a full review, because none of us have really been able to put loads and loads of miles on it yet, just ahead of this embargo.
Then I ran in a UK 8.5, which is my usual size. I think these come up slightly long in the toe box. I found maybe like an inch or so at the end. They felt a bit boat-like when I first put them on, but actually on the run that wasn't necessarily a problem. If you like a roomy fit with plenty of room at the end of the toe box, these will do nicely. If you like it more compact at that end, then you may wish to go half a size down. Though I found the rest of the wrap, the fit, everything else was good, and I think I would be happy to go true to size in these shoes.
So I found this to be true to size in a UK women's 6. It had good amount of room at the end of the toes. I've previously found that some Saucony shoes come up a little bit small on me, but this was bang on true to size. My feet are slightly, I'd say, more narrow than wide, and I found a good fit generally in most of the shoe around the midfoot. The area where I had a little issue was around the heel. I didn't feel like I got that real secure fit in the heel. I do use the extra laces. I know some people find my way of tying shoes a bit peculiar. I do use the extra laces, and I still wasn't able to get that good secure fit that I wanted. There was a little bit of heel slippage as I was running, and I would like a little bit extra length on the laces, please. But there's a good amount of padding around the ankle and in the tongue, so good padding there, good amount of structure in the around the ankle for keeping your foot nicely in position. So I know this is a neutral shoe, but I do think there are elements of it that make it more suited to people that are looking for a bit more support or stability than a lot of neutral plated shoes. So it is an interesting one because there's not a lot in that area.
So fit for me is an interesting one. I had the Kinvara Pro, I have the Kinvara Pro in a UK size 8. Generally a UK size 8 works for me in Saucony shoes. I haven't had any real issues in the shoes I've tested recently. When I first put these shoes on, it felt pretty good. I was pretty satisfied what I was feeling in terms of up front of the toes. It kind of opens up a little bit here and I think creates that kind of wider, more stable feel that you're going to get from this shoe in general. when I was out on the runs that I did with it, I did 3 runs in total. I did find it a little bit tight in the toes. It wasn't enough to, put me off from running more in it, but I did notice it a little bit of pressing there. It's not something I've experienced with Saucony shoes in general, so maybe there's scope to say maybe go half a size up on this. And I know I've got pretty narrow feet. Generally, I think Saucony shoes run pretty narrow, but I think this shoe opens up a little bit more elsewhere, but I just found it a little bit tight in the toes. Elsewhere, absolutely fine. Padding, pretty much, happy with that. Lockdown was pretty good in general as well. So it's just that little bit of narrowness probably just didn't quite work for me. I used thin socks and kind of medium thickness socks, and it was pretty much the same feeling on those 3 runs I did. So yeah, maybe an argument to go half a size up in UK size 8, which is not something I've had to say with Saucony shoes before.
The fit of the shoe, I found that it fit me true to size. If this is my normal size in UK 9, which is a US 10, that's the conversion I always have with Saucony, and it fits me perfectly well. I've got good amount of room in the toe box, decent hold around the midfoot and heel. It's not so wide that I've had to re-crank the laces yet, but it doesn't feel like a narrow shoe either. I have a pretty narrow foot. All round, completely happy with my shoe and my normal running shoe size, same size I have for all Saucony shoes.
So I've done 3 runs in the Kinvara Pro so far. I did a 5-mile run, and that was kind of at 7-minute, 30-minute mile pace. Then I did, the following day, I did a track session, and that was 5 by 800 meters, and that was kind of closer to my 5k pace at the moment, so kind of lower 6-minute mile pace. And then I did 9k today. That was kind of 8-minute mile pace, but I did drop down to 7:30, 7:40-minute mile pace for a couple of miles, just to kind of pick up the pace a little bit in places as well. Now, I have run in a Kinvara before, a couple of versions, not the most recent version, which Tom has tested. And what I know about the shoe and what I kind of, associate with the shoe is a shoe that, it's light, it's pretty low profile, not a massive amount of cushioning, but, pretty responsive, a good kind of shoe to use for kind of speed sessions, maybe not so much in terms of kind of doing longer runs in it, just because of the level of cushioning you're getting here. Now, the Kinvara Pro couldn't be further in terms of what I've experienced in Kinvara shoes previously. Now, and that's ultimately because this is a very different shoe fundamentally. Obviously, it's got a dual density midsole now, which this is not what we've had before in the Kinvara. You still have that Power Run foam, which is at the bottom of the shoe, but above that you've got the Power Run PB, which obviously used in Saucony's Endorphin shoes, and then you've got a Power Run Plus sock liner on top of that, so you get something that feels soft, you kind of sink into when you first kind of get into this shoe. You've got a bit of bounce there, but also you've almost got that Power Run there to kind of rein things in a little bit, still give you that kind of stable feel in it, kind of, as I said, you've got that kind of bounciness that makes it an enjoyable ride. You've got that kind of speed roll geometry, which I think makes it a shoe that you really kind of roll very nicely in as well. So there's elements here, those Endorphin shoes, which makes it feel like those shoes, which I think is a good thing. I think ultimately what Saucony's tried to do here is create something that feels like those top end Saucony shoes, but almost, a little bit more accessible. And I get that, and I can see what they're trying to do here. And I think on my first run it felt pretty good. As I said, you roll through really nice in it. It felt pretty good. I think in the track session, I could still run relatively quick in it, but I felt as I got later into that session, it felt harder work. I felt the weight of this shoe, definitely. I felt the firmness of it, particularly when I dropped back down on my heel and kind of, the middle of this shoe as well, where I just found I was working harder in that, in kind of those later reps to kind of get through and really kind of work a little bit quicker in this shoe. So I do feel like you can get some kind of nicer, smooth, kind of quick transitions in this shoe, but I think, ultimately, when I got longer into those runs or near the end of the runs, I did find it was hard work to run a shoe. It's not a super light shoe. It's a whole lot of shoe. I think I've kind of weighed it up against the Saucony Triumph, and it's pretty much the same weight in terms of that shoe. Now, obviously, that has got a different midsole makeup. That hasn't got the Power Run. That's got Power Run Plus, so it's a lot softer, a lot more kind of more comfortable, a lot more plush. This is kind of a mix of giving you that kind of Power Run PB, kind of bounce and lightness, but also giving you that firmness that we associate with the Kinvara. So I think in some ways it kind of works in terms of what I think Saucony is trying to do with this shoe. In other ways, I still think it's held back I think personally for me, in terms of the weight and that firmness that you're getting, that kind of works against what you're getting in terms of that speed roll, you know, kind of design, in terms of what you're getting in terms of that rider in general. A little bit like I found with the Endorphin Shift, I think, as well, where I think there's, you know, again, Saucony trying to make, I think, the shoe or that kind of top end elements of its speed shoes more accessible. I think in places it works here on the Kinvara Pro, but ultimately I think the size of the shoe, and again I felt the heaviness of it, particularly when I tried to pick up the pace in places, particularly in that track session where it worked against me. Now, so outside wise, I actually, you know, despite us being in a bit of a kind of heat wave, or, you know, the height of the UK summer, we did get some rain in that track session. It was wet. The grip was absolutely fine in terms of that wet, you know, I didn't have any issues, I wasn't slipping around, and then obviously in the kind of drier roads and pavements it was absolutely fine. So outsole wise, it looks pretty fine. It's nothing particularly, you know, special, I think, about it. You know, there is obviously some exposed bits there in terms of the foam, but it feels like the, you know, outsole is going to handle a decent amount of running in it, and I wouldn't be concerned in terms of the durability. I'm seeing a little bit coming off a little bit of the heel, but ultimately that's kind of what I expect so far. So yeah, for me, as I said, I think there's some elements that I really like about the shoe. I can see what Saucony's trying to do with the shoe, but I think the size of it, the weight of it, still that little bit of firmness, which I don't absolutely love, but I get what it offers in terms of the shoe. It didn't absolutely work for me, I think, in those few runs, and maybe it just was a little bit too heavy, a little bit too big for me. But, you know, more runs to do. Let's see if it works. Maybe it kind of, that kind of heavier, kind of harder element of the midsole will maybe break in a little bit more and make it a little bit more manageable and a little bit more kind of easier to handle, and really kind of elevate those kind of elements that I do think work really nicely in this shoe.
So I've done a couple of runs in the Kinvara Pro so far. I've done just an easy 5 miler and an easy to steady 5 miler, working from easy pace down to sub 6 minute miling for a mile or two. And the shoe really does ride how you'd expect it to ride, given the tech on paper and the high stack. It's a very big shoe. It's got a nice rocker involved, so you do roll quite smoothly through runs. It's not particularly soft. It feels very dense underfoot. You've got that Power Run PB layer there to add a little bit more softness and bounce, but the predominant feeling is quite a dense feeling underfoot for me, but not in an unpleasant way. It doesn't feel very weighty. It doesn't feel harsh. It really does feel comfortable, cushioned, and there's a nice rocker to it, so you can roll along quite merrily at any kind of easy or steady pace. So when I did increase the pace in the shoe, it certainly felt quite big, but I do think the geometry works quite well, that you can roll up towards tempo paces in it quite comfortably, even if there probably are shoes that are more suited to that. I think for me, it certainly felt best just at easy paces, just cruising around. It's a really good cruiser of a shoe. It's very tanky, very protective, without feeling too big and heavy, despite the fact it is quite a big and heavy shoe. It doesn't feel like that on the foot in my experience so far. Also say the second run I did yesterday was an absolutely torrential rain. Like the pavements were flooded, the rain stayed on the ground the entire time I was running, and I had no problems with grip. Like, I got very wet feet because the upper obviously doesn't keep any water out, but this outsole does grip really well. I think it's going to be pretty durable as well. And I will say, I do like how it feels when a shoe doesn't have any kind of rubber on the outsole. It's the same with the Mach 5. You do get a very nice feeling of coming into contact with the ground. And on such a big shoe like this, I do think that's quite enjoyable because it doesn't feel slappy at all. You're already quite disconnected from the ground, given the high stack here, and you feel a little bit more connected as a result of that outsole choice. So I do like that. Hopefully it won't affect durability too much though, because obviously this is an expensive shoe. So yeah, all around, first 2 runs have been pretty pleasant in the Kinvara Pro. I don't think it's suited to going very fast or even quite fast in the shoe, but if you're going to roll around at easy, steady paces, pick it up occasionally, progression runs, you can handle that quite well. For myself, I view it much more as a daily trainer, but I think on the market at large, it is quite an interesting option as a plated shoe for people who maybe don't get on with other plated shoes.
Well, that's a lot of shoe, isn't it? You get it out of the box and you think, whoa, that's a big shoe. It's 240 grams. It's not light. There's a big old bit of foam under your foot there. So I was didn't know what to expect, but I went to my first run in it I was doing a local club 5k race. Started on grass for a lap of a rugby pitch as the first sort of 300 meters before we headed out onto the road. So it was an interesting start to a race. The grass was not as short as it could have been, and there was a lot of runners were going, oh, I probably shouldn't have chosen Vaporfly this morning. So it performed well. Now, one thing, the outsole is lacking in any kind of rubber. So I was a bit nervous about how that grassy first few 100 meters was gonna go. It hadn't started raining, but it was threatening raining, and there'd been a few drops, so it wasn't ideal shoe, ideal conditions combination. Having said that, I stayed upright, didn't fall over, didn't turn an ankle or anything, so I can't complain about that at all. We went out onto the roads, and it was a very twisty turny course. It was not closed roads, so we were up and down onto pavements, up curbs, crossing roads, going around corners. A lot of twisting and turning, and for a big shoe it performed really well. I was not kind of having any problems, thinking I wasn't feeling very nimble or anything like that. I had no complaints in that department, so that was a tick. I was hoping that I'd get a bit of a boost from that, the plate and the speed roll technology, and I could feel that. I definitely knew that I was in a plated shoe. I was getting a bit of extra help there. I had done on the road before the race started, I had done like 10 minutes warm up, easy jog, and I was like very much thinking, how's the race going to go? And I could already feel there was that little bit of encouragement to get me forward, that nice heel to toe motion. That was good as I was kind of picking up the pace and doing a bit of striding. So great from that perspective. It wasn't like the full-on racing shoe experience. It's a faster training shoe, so it wasn't as peppy as something like the Endorphin Pro, but yes, you can tell that there's that technology there. So a second run in the shoe was 4 miles easy, out along a nice flat tarmacked path along a rowing lake. I had a bit tired legs from a long run a couple of days before, and it was good. I enjoyed running in it. I still had a little bit of that, wasn't quite as happy with the heel fit as I wanted to be. I felt like I needed to tighten those laces tighter to feel securely in the shoe, but it was good. Some plated shoes are difficult to run easy. They don't really lend themselves to that, slowing down for those easy miles. This was fine, definitely comfortable for those 4 miles. Other than that heel issue, it does feel stable underfoot. There's because of the width of the sole and the support around the ankle. Did feel like if you were somebody that is used to a bit more support in a shoe, did feel good from that perspective.
Now onto the run test. I've run just short of 20 miles in the Kinvara Pro. That includes a half marathon test that mixes up the pace from slow and sluggish, sort of plodding pace, right up close to my marathon pace. It was mainly on road, but with a little bit of light off-road too. Over the early miles, my instant reaction was that these felt a bit heavy and a bit clunky, and that midsole was actually a bit sluggish and a bit soft. It wasn't as responsive as I was hoping from that big stack of Power Run PB foam, and I wasn't really feeling any benefit from the plate. So I was ready to consign these shoes to the pile that says don't really work for me, along with the Nova Blast, things that are slightly bigger, slightly bulkier, a little bit softer. But actually into the second half of that half marathon test, the midsole seemed to come to life. It was almost like I'd woken it up, but maybe it was just that my own legs had woken up. But whatever happened, I've got a bit more spring from the midsole, a little bit more from the plate. And actually when I moved with intent, I think they gave just about enough back to feel exciting. But they're still a heavy shoe. That extra stack of cushioning, particularly in the heel, though, means that you're going to get a really wide base to run off. And overall, I found them to be a pretty stable shoe. I can see a lot of people enjoying these shoes. I think it will tick a lot of boxes for many, many runners who like it a bit more cushion. But I found myself wondering kind of what they're for. If this is trying to drop into the plated super trainer bracket, I personally think they're a bit too heavy, a bit too chunky, and just sort of marginally too cumbersome. For me, I think they're better suited to easy recovery runs and those kind of heads-up plods where you're just out to enjoy yourself and kind of cruise around. And they do a great job at that. I think they're very capable for those kinds of runs, and a very happy run indeed. I'd be more than happy to go and do that. But I don't think they've got great kind of top-end speed when you compare them to some of the shoes like the Speed 3. That also means they lack a bit of the versatility. They feel a bit more like the Asics Gel Nimbus 25 to me, that kind of thing. Though that said, I definitely prefer them to the Nimbus 25. I think they feel a bit more compact. And even though they're a massive hulking great shoe, I just felt they're a little bit more lively than the Nimbus.
Overall, it's difficult to say where I sit with this shoe, because for me personally, I'm not somebody who would choose a plated shoe for a regular training shoe. I tend to leave that technology to race day. So am I the target market? I'm not sure, but £200 is a lot for a daily training shoe. If we look at something like the Hoka Mac X, personally I preferred running in this one, but there's a big price tag difference between those two shoes. So the other issue is what we remain to see is about the outsole. We can't vouch it yet for the durability of it because only 2 runs in. Would it benefit from a little bit more rubber there? It's already quite, it's not a light shoe, so I don't see where it would hurt to have put a little bit of rubber there for a little bit of added durability, given that it's supposed to be for everyday training and you want to clock up a lot of miles in this shoe for that £200 price tag before you trade it in for your next pair. So enjoyed running in the shoe, bit pricey for me personally.
So, very initial verdict on the Kinvara Pro after a couple of runs. I'd say that it's not really a Kinvara and it's not really Pro, but it is quite a good shoe. It's the Endorphin Max, as I said before. It works quite well within the Endorphin line, I think, as a better option for me than the Endorphin Shift for an easy day trainer. I think I much prefer the feel of this shoe to the Endorphin Shift, which I did find quite hefty. Didn't really love the feel of it underfoot. This feels quite nice for cruising around in, and you can pick up the pace for some of those other daily miles when you're moving towards tempo pace quite comfortably as well. For me, the job of this shoe is done perfectly well by the Endorphin Speed 3. I find that very comfortable. I can do a nice range of runs in it, and I just use the Endorphin Speed 3. But then I know that lots of runners might find Endorphin Free Speed not cushioned enough or not stable enough to use in general. And then the Endorphin Max / Kinvara Pro is more cushioned and stable and a more comfortable shoe for that kind of training. So some people might prefer the feel of it to the Endorphin Speed 3. And then if you're looking at it maybe as a plated shoe that more people can use who don't get on with super shoes that are too soft or unstable, then it's more in the mold of things like the Nike Zoom Fly 5 and the Bondi X from Hoka, and it's a better shoe than both of those. I prefer this shoe definitely, the way it feels at slow and fast paces. It's got a nice cruisy feel to it. I think it'd be a really nice long run option. I just don't really know if it's good enough at any job to really justify going out and spending this kind of cash on it. If you're not worried about the financial outlay, it's a really nice shoe to have in the rotation alongside the other Endorphin shoes in Saucony's range, and it's good daily trainer, long run shoe for faster runners, and then a nice all-rounder option really for runners who don't get on with things like the Endorphin Speed or other plated shoes. So yeah, it's got a few uses. I think it's a nice shoe to run in so far. Definitely keen to get out doing some long runs in it. We'll come back with full comparisons to things like the Endorphin Speed 3. We've had a chance to test the Kinvara Pro more, but it's a pretty solid first impression for me. I enjoyed those 2 runs in it. I think calling it the Kinvara Pro is a slightly strange choice, but it is a shoe I can certainly see having a role for people either in a rotation or as a big cushioned all-rounder with a bit of pop for faster runs.
So initial verdict on the Saucony Kinvara Pro is that this is not the shoe that I thought I would be pulling it out of the box when I first got it. And I think if you are a Kinvara fan, you've liked the last few versions, this couldn't be further from that shoe. It's just a whole different shoe in terms of what you're getting here. I think the other way to look at it is that it's, this is, I think, Saucony's way of pulling down features from its Endorphin range, putting it in a more kind of stable design. And I guess for people who want that kind of speedier feel, that kind of feeling you get running in those shoes, but are a little bit concerned about, as I said, the stability of running in something like that, running it in longer distance, and maybe this shoe will better cater for you. It is not cheap, it's £180, but I think it's probably sitting up against things like the Asics Super Blast, which Tom has tested and Nick's got in at the moment. Also, I think the New Balance SC Trainer V2, which we're getting into test as well. Those shoes, which are a bit bigger in terms of size, in terms of level of cushioning, but also giving you features, again, of those speedier shoes in New Balance and Asics range that makes it suitable to run longer in, to run some kind of more up-tempo stuff in it. But is it worth the money? That's the big question here. I'm not entirely convinced. I just worry a little bit about the weight of the shoe and whether, personally for me, it works for me. It might work for some other runners that want that, but ultimately the weight does feel a little bit of an issue, and just a slight firmness in it, which may kind of ease off on more running in it. But I think so far there's elements I like about the Kinvara Pro, but ultimately, is it a shoe that I foresee being one that I'm going to use on a regular basis? I'm not 100% convinced right now. Maybe I'll feel different about that once I've done more runs in it, but right now I'm kind of mixed. I feel mixed about this shoe at the moment. As I said, I like elements of it, but as a package, I'm not sure it really works for me just yet. But plenty more running to do. I really want to do some much longer stuff in it. I think that's where this shoe will really tell whether it can maintain the kind of good attributes of it over longer periods, and that will really dictate, I think, whether it's worth the money and whether it's worth picking up over other shoes.
So onto my verdict then. I'm going to come straight out and say it. I still don't think this is my kind of shoe necessarily. There's just a bit too much going on. There's too much weight. I prefer things a little bit stripped back and somewhat more direct. Overall, that said, I was really generally happy with the way they ran over the miles that I covered, particularly at those easier paces, up to the kind of my mid pace. And after a sluggish start, this is a shoe that really grew on me. And when I was moving with more purpose and intent, that big stack of foam and that plate, I think, engaged for a more energetic result that I think a lot of runners will actually like. However, I'd say it's better at slower paces. It's a great option for cruising and recovery miles, better than it is, I think, for mid to top speed efforts. So that versatility is a question mark because it lacks a bit of the top speed. I don't think it's quite as good as some of the other good plated and non-plated daily trainers. And that extra weight would probably stop me choosing it over lighter and more lively shoes like the Speed 3, the Mach 5, the Mach X, and the Puma Velocity Nitro 2 are some that spring to mind. The other thing, it's also got a whopping price tag, and I'm a bit worried about the creep of daily shoes going over the £200 mark, even though they've got plates in them. So for me, that's not great. And overall, I think there are better, cheaper shoes out there. For me, the Saucony Kinvara Pro falls into the bucket of good, but not great, and a little bit expensive.